Jackson. I would actually like to begin my rebuttal at the end of Jackson's argument and refer to what I think is a very telling implication of what he said. Towards the end of the argument, Jackson made mention of what helps constitute his faith for him. That this notion that if there were strong evidence for God, that it would somehow undermine the value of his belief. And this, I think, has major implications for the rest of his argument. Because remember that the bulk of his argument was built on clues, he called them, inferences from the natural world to suggest the existence of a God. And yet, if he tells us that the bare existence of such evidence at sufficient power undermines reasons to believe in God, then it seems to me like we already have a settled question. That if we want to have an argument about this, that the more evidence Jackson has, the worse off his position is. It's a very fortunate position for me to be in, but given that it might seem like a bit of a cheap shot, I will not rest my case there. I will instead turn to an argument that Sam Harris makes in his book, The End of Faith. I'll even use the same image that he uses because I find it so striking and so helpful. Talking about why is it that a preference for God's existence is not terribly useful to us in settling this question. Suppose, as Sam Harris asked us to do, that a man tells you that there is a diamond the size of a freight train buried in his backyard, buried very deep in his backyard, much too deep for him ever to reach, but it is there. And you say, well, how do you know? What happened? You got a metal detector or something? He says, no. I really like the thought that there's a vast ocean of riches under my yard. My family and I, we have very rewarding get-togethers on Sundays doing the digging in the backyard. You know, it's a rewarding character-building experience. This is not an argument. This is a statement of a preference, and preferences, I think, are very poor guideposts to beliefs. I mean, think about it. I mean, the Holocaust was an awfully nasty thing to occur, but that gives us no good reasons to think that it didn't. I think that the same goes for every belief. I think that preferences should not be used to support our reasons for believing. But turning to what I think is the more substantial bulk of Jackson's argument, these are teleological arguments, they're called, arguments from design, specifically from certain fundamental physical features of the universe. And Jackson's absolutely correct. There are incredibly striking facts about our universe. That if the cosmological constant, for example, were off by a factor of less than 1 in a trillion trillions, life would be impossible. Our kind of life, any kind of life would be impossible. Probably the formation of baryon would even be impossible. There could be nothing. That we live in a universe that seems fine-tuned is the phrase that's often used for our existence. To this, I give, I think, 3 responses. The first, more of a banal one, is that it should not surprise us that should we exist, we would exist in a universe that harbors our existence. Now, we could only exist in universes in which we are possible, but that's not much of an explanation. That's simply why the argument is not surprising. I think that the more substantial response to this argument is that, as I was trying to establish in my opening speech, is that, again, I have no idea why this is the case. I think any physicist who does is deluding themselves. And I think that hypotheses like the multiverse hypothesis they're on par with the invisible man hypothesis. They are convenient stories to dismiss this quite probing question that has no evidence other than that it solves a problem in a naturalistic way. I do not accept the multiverse hypothesis. I don't reject it. I have no firm belief about it whatsoever. I'm waiting for the evidence. I've heard that fantastic work is being done showing the evidence for it. I've heard that Lee Smolin's lab, for example, has devised some incredibly clever experiments to determine what is going on here. And I strongly encourage everyone to check it out. It's fascinating stuff. Or Brian Greene's book, Fabric of the Cosmos, gives a summary of these very issues that I'm discussing. That's a book that I'll return to in a moment. My third objection to this, I think, is a reiteration of the problem of evil. That we live in a universe that, yes, absolutely, it seems very much like it was designed for us. That's the intuitive force of the argument from design, that even a very small variation in these constants would create us. But also, it seems like these constants have also created Hurricane Katrina, for example. They've created Ebola, for example. That the same combination of constants it does not seem to be coming from a perfectly good designer in any case, if it infers a designer at all, because the evidence as it exists shows us that these constants produce some very nasty results. And I do not think that these are guideposts to a perfectly good, perfectly competent designer, perhaps an incompetent tinkerer, perhaps a sociopath, perhaps no designer at all. I think the latter. I think that remains the position after what Jackson has said, because as I've indicated, the lack of reasons to believe is sufficient to not believe. But turning to this notion that there's no scientific explanation, for example, for the Big Bang, again, I have full agreement. I have no idea why there was a Big Bang. But I wish to make a subtle point of epistemology using Jackson's poker analogy about dealing 100 flushes in a row. Of course that would be suspect. You'd be perfectly justified in saying that was a deliberate decision, somebody is cheating. What are the reasons for that? Because we know what the odds in poker are. We know that a flush is extraordinarily unlikely. But what reasons do we have to think that nothingness is more likely than somethingness? What reasons do we have to think that the explanation that the universe itself is in need of explaining? It seems, as far as I understand physics today, that stuff coming from nothing is a fairly commonplace occurrence. That even in a total vacuum, at the level of the vacuum field, events are occurring. The component elements of baryon seem to be appearing and disappearing at all times. Very strange phenomenon. Radiation, alpha particles, beta particles, emerging and disappearing at random. I again refer you to the work of Victor Stenger, a brilliant scientist who's done work on this issue, showing that things seeming to spring into existence by magic is not inconsistent with physics. And again, I say that given that we have a naturalistic explanation, that we should rely on those, that we should default to those positions. So moving back to the question of what do we do with the fact that Jackson said that we cannot prove God's existence? That we might have some clues, might have some indications. He has his faith guiding him, and I think that faith is an equivalent term. And I assume Jackson will agree with this. That faith is an equivalent term for belief without evidence, because if there were evidence, you would not call it faith. You would refer to it as established belief. I think that belief without evidence is the most overrated of the virtues. Certainly, faith. I mean, why should we establish beliefs in things, and which things do we choose to believe in without evidence? There are an infinite number of non-evidenced things in this universe: unicorns, goblins, fairies, honest Republicans. These things do not exist. These things are phantoms. We have no reason to believe in them, and yet we pick and choose among these ones that make us happy. These ones help us build communities. These help religious charities do their thing. All very nice things. Certainly, I have the utmost respect for religious-based charity. But our desire to have a firm ontological grounding for that charity, that desire is not sufficient. That the firmness of a conviction does not the truth make. And it is on that principle, the principle of parsimony, that I conclude now, and I defer to Jackson for his opinions on this matter. Thanks, guys.
I'm holding the camera. I would clap, though.
I'd just like to start by returning to what Chris said about the end of my argument, where he said that I said more evidence would mean that my faith was less meaningful. I'm sorry if I misled you. That's not what I meant to say, if I said it. The issue at hand is simply the fact that faith, I do have faith without evidence. And my point in that was that if there was conclusive proof, like